to the Damascus Road podcast. On the road to Damascus, Paul had a radical encounter with Jesus and his life was changed forever. That is what we hope and pray for here. Now, on to this week's episode.
I wanted to ask you, have any of you guys gone to Costco recently? If you don't know what Costco is, it's this giant warehouse-style bulk grocery store that Ryan and I go to about once a month to get some very specific things, namely diapers, toilet paper, Kalamata olives, and goat cheese. Because in case you didn't know, Costco has unbeatable prices on fancy cheese, and goat cheese is just the best. Now normally these things are pretty easy to get, like diapers and toilet paper at the back, and then goat cheese and the olives are in the fridge. But occasionally we need to get other things at Costco, like almonds or dish detergent. And it is like searching for a needle in a haystack. Their aisles are not labeled, and the stuff moves all the time. The nuts were right next to the cereal last time, but this month the almonds are by the sugar and the rest of the nuts are by the chocolate. It is so frustrating. So we have to go up and down each aisle until we finally locate the new hiding place of the almonds. Why would anyone set up a store so inefficiently? And why do you have to move stuff all the time? It's ridiculous. Well, I've discovered it is because Costco's best interests are not in my efficiency in finding the almonds. Because you see, as I trawl up and down each aisle, I find that somehow more things than just almonds end up in my basket. Giant double pack of Nutella, yes please. An industrial-sized bag of chocolate chips, of course. Chocolate-covered almonds plus normal almonds, you know it. Clearly I like chocolate. It's a weakness. But you see, Costco has realized that our behaviors can be manipulated by our habitats. If we can't find something easily, they know that we will search. And when you see something, you often decide that you want it, regardless of if you have ever felt the need for a huge tub of all-natural, crunchy sauerkraut before. I've fallen into this trap. It's delicious, by the way. Costco shapes their space intentionally to get the behavior that they want out of us, which is to buy more things. Now, Costco is not the only place guilty of this. Do you know why milk and eggs are located at the back of the grocery store and not next to each other? Well, it's because milk and eggs are two of the most high-frequency grocery store purchases. So each time a customer has to come in to pick up a gallon of milk, they want you to have to walk through the entire store, front to back, before you can get out of there, ideally with an extra item or two in tow. Intentional space to influence intentional behaviors. Now, I find the most irritating and obvious consumer space shaping in the checkout line. I'm pretty tall, so eye level for me does not include like those bottom two rows of the checkout aisle. But do you know whose eye line it is in? My children. And those two bottom shelves are chock full of the most colorful, cartooned out candies and gimmicks that you have ever seen in your entire life. It is like catnip for my children. And as we stand corralled in the awkward cattle gate of the checkout line, struggling to put our milk and our eggs on the conveyor belt, my children are going nuts, clamoring and hollering for Kinder eggs and disgusting push suckers that they wouldn't even like if they got them. It is so incredibly frustrating. Why do you do this to me, grocery store? But I know why the grocery store does it. Because it works. Because how we shape our space shapes our behaviors. And you can see this in all sorts of places. Grocery stores are not the only offender. Spaces help modify and influence our behaviors, like how lecture hall's chairs are all oriented in the same direction to focus our attention on the speaker, versus how chairs are arranged at like the DMV in straight lines to discourage conversation, versus how chairs all face each other around a table at a restaurant to do the opposite, to encourage conversation. Our space affects us and our subsequent behaviors. But what if we could use this principle for good? If we know that Costco can influence us to buy more things just by intentionally arranging their store inefficiently, Are there ways that we can arrange our spaces, our dorms, our apartments, our cubicles, our lab stations, our living rooms, to influence positive behaviors? Ryan talked about choosing character last week and how the small choices we make over time can form us more and more into who God made us to be. Is there a way that we can arrange the places we inhabit to also form us well, to make us more generous, more hospitable, more connected, more centered, and God-rooted people? Well, let's find out. Our space affecting us is not a new concept, though its popularity has really only gained traction in the last 30 to 40 years. And nor is the psychology of space only a field of study for marketing experts who want to manipulate our buying habits, though they do take advantage. The reason marketing experts can even take advantage of this is because this is how God has wired and created us. Our God is a God who creates intentional spaces to foster intentional behaviors and interactions. So at the very beginning, in the book of Genesis, God creates spaces. He separates the sky from the sea and the water from the land and the day from the night. Instead of leaving creation as this formless, undifferentiated void, God creates very clear and defined spaces. And each space is meant for different things. Like the water is meant for the swimming creatures, and the land is meant for the creeping creatures, and the sky is meant for the flying creatures. The day is an intentional space for productivity and work, while the night is a protected space for sleeping and resting. And our bodies are wired to respond to these intentional spaces. Do you know what sort of light a sunrise emits? Blue light. The kind of light that wakes you up and stimulates your brain. It's the kind of light that your phone or TV or electronics give off. Do you know what sort of light a sunset emits? Yellow light. The kind of light that makes you sleepy. The light your night setting on your phone is trying to emulate. Because our bodies are wired to respond to the cues in our environment, and they help us do appropriate behaviors, like waking up with the sunrise or falling asleep with the sunset. Now, God also additionally makes one more intentional space during creation. He makes the Garden of Eden. Eden is a special space set aside for God to be intimately with his people, to walk with them and talk with them and share life with them. It is a holy and set apart place that encourages the behavior of being with God. But when people sinned and destroyed the sanctity of Eden, this intentional space to be with God was ruined. But God loves us enough and knows how much space can affect our behaviors, that he continually makes intentional spaces for humans to be with God. He continually invites us into relationship with him by designating special places to encourage that interaction and behavior. Now, one of these special places is called the tabernacle. In the Bible, at the end of the book of Exodus, God gives many detailed instructions on how to build and arrange and structure the tabernacle so that this space promotes positive behaviors on our part. And the tabernacle is essentially like this giant tent. And this is very appropriate for the Israelites because at this time in history, they are a nomadic people and they need an intentional space that suits their situation and life, just like we do. And for them at this time, that's moving a lot. So a tent is very apropos. Now, if you're interested in reading about the tabernacle, please refer to Exodus chapters 25 through 31. Now, I'm worried that perhaps you missed this. Let's not gloss over this. I'm going to say this a different way. If you want to find out about the tabernacle, there are 243 verses in the Bible dedicated to the instructions on the tabernacle. 243! Here's an excerpt to whet your appetite. Make the tabernacle from 10 curtains of finely woven linen. Decorate the curtains with blue, purple, and scarlet thread and with skillfully embroidered cherubim. These 10 curtains must all be exactly the same size, 42 feet long and 6 feet wide. Join 5 of these curtains together to make one long curtain. Then join the other 5 into a second long curtain. Put loops of blue yarn along the edge of the last curtain in each set. The 50 loops along the edge of one curtain are to match the 50 loops along the edge of the other curtain. Then make 50 gold clasps and fasten the long curtains together with the clasps. In this way, the tabernacle will be made of one continuous piece. Whew, man, can you guys imagine having that as your memory verse? And that's just an excerpt. It keeps going and going and going. It details table dimensions and lampstands, decorations, candle snuffers, the specific fruit to be embroidered in specific colors. It is quite thorough. Not the most engaging 6 chapters in the Bible, I'm not gonna lie, but they're there. And they're there for a reason. Why? Well, all of these instructions on how to build the tabernacle are not just the Israelites keeping really good records. These 6 chapters are part of God literally speaking to Moses in the Bible, and God himself directly planning out this space, which can seem very weird because we often expect God to only talk about the stuff that seems like really important, like don't murder people or turn away from your sins and come back to me. Not curtain loops and table dimensions. Yet God oddly spends 243 verses on tabernacle details. And that is significant. The fact that God uses up so much biblical real estate to talk about candle snuffers and pomegranate embroidery tells us something important. It tells us that our spaces matter a lot. That the details and setup of our spaces matter a lot. That how we structure and define and shape our spaces has a big impact and needs to be treated with care and consideration. Although on the surface, the length of a table doesn't seem half as important as don't murder people, God is cluing us into the fact that our spaces are significant. And the reason they're significant is because of how God created us from the beginning. Because he knows, just like the marketing executives have finally figured out, that our spaces shape our behaviors. And if we are meant to be formed more and more into the image of Christ and more into the people who God has called us to be, our spaces play a part in that. Because those spaces help form our behaviors and our character and who we are choosing to become. So, since God himself spent 243 verses on intricately and deliberately shaping space, we're going to take a critical look at our spaces. This is important for a reason. Specifically, since we know that our spaces influence our habits and our behaviors, we want to analyze what habits and behaviors do our spaces promote in us? What defaults get turned on when we step into our cars or our cubicles or our kitchens? Are they behaviors that are forming us more and more into people of character, people who are following God's heart and loving others well? Are they neutral behaviors? Or at the worst, are they negative behaviors that influence us to choose a worse version of ourselves? How can treating our spaces intentionally form us more into who we're made to be? In his book, The Tech-Wise Family, which this series is based on, author Andy Crouch talks about this idea of nudges. And here's what he says. As popularized in Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein's fascinating book by the same name, nudges are small changes in the environment around us that make it easier for us to make the choices we want to make or want others to make. Nudges don't generally make us do anything, but they make certain choices easier and more likely. They don't focus so much on changing anything about our own preferences and ability to choose well. They simply put the best choice right in front of us and make the wrong choice harder. So this idea of nudges, like Andy Crouch says, are just small changes to our environment that help make the good choices easier. It is looking at your space with a critical eye, recognizing that your space shapes you, and then choosing to shape it so it in turn shapes you well. And that's a confusing statement, so let me say it again. It is looking at your space with a critical eye, recognizing that it shapes you, and then choosing to shape it so that it in turn shapes you well. Let me give you an example. In our house, we like to play games, and we have quite a few. Our favorite one right now is called Gloomhaven. If you haven't played it, it's awesome. I highly recommend it. It's epic, collaborative, which is my jam, story-based, and super cool. Now, when we first moved into our house, the best place to store the plethora of games that we had was upstairs in the loft closet. It's huge, it had a giant shelf, it stored all the games perfectly. But issue, we don't actually hang out upstairs. We hang out downstairs. So whenever the kids would ask to play a game, our environment influenced me. It was a small nudge, but it was a nudge in the wrong direction because how we had positioned the game in our house meant that choosing them required going up and down a flight of stairs. Not that big of a deal, I know. But just that small negative environmental nudge meant that I was more apt to say no than yes to playing a game, simply because I'm lazy and I don't want to walk up the stairs. And critically looking at our space and how it was shaping us, my husband Brian and I decided that we didn't like the current nudges in our environment. They nudge us away from playing games and the positive qualities of family time and creativity and connecting. And we often defaulted to something passive like watching TV because it was just right there and you didn't have to climb a flight of stairs to do it. So we shaped our space. We put in a set of cabinets downstairs right next to the table where we play our games. And then we took all of the games from the loft closet upstairs and put them in those cabinets downstairs. And shaping our space has now been shaping us positively. We play way more games now than we used to because the environmental nudge is now in the right direction. And it promotes qualities and characters in us and our children that we value. And like Annie Crouch said earlier, nudges don't make us make good choices. They simply make the better option easier instead of harder. Just like Costco doesn't make you buy a double pack of Nutella, they just make it a little easier to fall into temptation. So how can we start shaping our spaces with good nudges so that they help form good character and Christ-likeness in us? That the intentionality of our spaces makes us more and more into who God has called us to be. I want to take a look at another passage of scripture that gives really good insight here. And I want to warn you, on first blush, it does not seem very helpful, but stick with me. This is from the book of Joshua. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So yes, I agree. This does not seem immediately applicable to nudges and how you might arrange your dorm room or your lab station. But I want to focus on two important aspects in the passage. And the first is in verse 14. It says, put away the gods. Now this statement is really profound, both from a theological perspective and from a very physical, practical perspective. Let me explain. A God is anything or anyone that we give our worship to. And worship is not just singing songs to someone. Worship is time and attention and trust. Now in the Old Testament, these gods that people gave time and attention to had literal names like Baal or Asherah. And they worshiped these gods at shrines or Asherah poles. But in our context, our gods often have sneakier names like entertainment or productivity or lust or feeling busy and important. And we worship these false gods at the altars of our phones and our work computers and our TVs. Now, I'm not saying that your phone or your computer or your TV is bad. Rather, it is our interactions with them and the gods that they allow us to worship that can sometimes be problematic. How much time and attention and trust are we giving to entertainment or productivity or lust or feeling busy and important or whatever our God is? Are our altars of phones and computers and TVs making it easier to give time and attention to these false gods? If so, we need to take Joshua's advice, put away your gods. Like literally, put them away. In your space, put them away. My friends Tyler and Megan did a space shaping evaluation several months ago, and they noticed that their phone chargers were plugged in at their bedside tables, which is not inherently bad. But they realized that the proximity of their phones to their sleeping space nudged them away from shutting down. Rather than connecting with each other at the end of the day, they would connect with Facebook. Rather than learning how to fall asleep naturally, they would scroll and scroll until exhausted. And they are clever people, and they know that phones are dopamine dispensers, and that the willpower to resist something that pleasurable that is so easy to access is not very high. So they shape their space, and they put away their gods. They literally made a cabinet in their living room with all of their chargers and accessories, all the things a little phone needs to feel happy. And at nighttime, Tyler and Megan take their phones, put them in their special cabinets, close the door, and walk away. They are putting away their gods in their space, practicing their values of not being needed or entertained all the time, leaning into human connection rather than digital connection, creating space to pray and to be bored at night instead of numbed. They removed the negative nudge in their environment, and they put away their gods. So I want to invite you guys, take a look at your space. What are the gods in your environment? What do you devote time and attention to that maybe is not shaping your character positively? What keeps you from connecting to God or to others? What's a source of temptation for you? What altars make it easier for you to worship false gods? Go through your house and make a catalog of the gods and altars in your space. And then next step, what positive nudges can you create by putting these away, either literally or metaphorically? For my husband Ryan, delicious food items can be a temptation. So in our pantry, he has deliberately shaped the space and put away gods. The delicious, tempting things are no longer at eye level, and they're now quite hard to access. Like you literally have to push aside all the cans of beans to access the chips at the very back of the cupboard. Again, the nudge doesn't make you make good choices. It just makes good choices easier. If you struggle with workaholism and not setting appropriate boundaries around productivity, maybe having your work computer in your bedroom is not a good nudge. If you struggle with wasting too much time on video games or obsessively reading or crocheting, consider putting those things in hard to access places, like the bottom of your laundry basket, or under your bed, or under your roommate's pillow, whatever works for you. If you struggle with porn, don't hesitate to reach out for help and accountability, because that often does not get resolved by yourself. But also consider the nudges in your environment. Though radical, maybe switching to a desktop computer that you keep in the living room would be helpful, or investing in software that helps put away those gods, or leaving your phone charger in the kitchen rather than in your bedroom. Again, nudges will not make you make good decisions. There are always ways around it. You can always just literally push aside the can of beans and get to the chips. But instead, putting away our gods just makes it easier for us to make the better choice, forming our character slowly over time with continued intentional positive choices. Now, the second half of the Joshua passage that is helpful in shaping our space is from the final verse. It says, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And we talked about the literal way that we can put gods away in our space. And we want to take the same sort of lens to this verse. We're not just asking how we can serve the Lord, but literally, how can our house, the place we live in and spend time in, that we sleep and eat and play and work and worship in, serve the Lord? How can our literal physical spaces invite us into worship of God? Now, there are lots of really wonderful and godly choices or behaviors that we can choose to put some intention behind that help us to serve God and to become more like Him. Practices like hospitality, generosity, connectedness, simplicity, slowing, silence, and solitude. And we can use our houses and our spaces strategically to help us choose these practices in the way that they form our character more and more into who God made us to be. So I want to give you just a quick example for each of these to get your minds turning. But the sky's the limit. What practice can help you form your character in this season? What are creative ways to shape your space to promote that? Don't feel weird getting crazy with it. Okay, so hospitality. Thrift some folding chairs. They're collapsible, they don't take up much space, and they suddenly amplify the number of people you feel like you can host. Or you could set up your dorm room with a bunch of pillows and a low round table, and anyone can pull up a pillow and hang out. It's like a fun slumber party. Get a Costco-sized thing of paper plates and cups, and then you'll always have enough dishes for whoever shows up. Ryan and I got a coffee maker to practice hospitality. We don't drink coffee. Coffee is disgusting. But our friends like it. So we got one, so we can love them and their weird tastes well. Okay, some ideas for generosity. Have a bin in your entryway to collect things that you don't need. Periodically just go through and drop stuff in it and then give it away. Buy a casserole dish. This is what my friend did. And then bake brownies and casseroles and lasagna and 7-layer dip, whatever people like, and give it to them. Connectedness. Try putting your TV in a cabinet. Or like my sister and brother-in-law, don't even have a TV available. They arranged their living room not oriented around the TV, but with all the chairs and couches facing each other to encourage easy and natural conversation. Put fun activities that you really enjoy doing with others, like games or puzzles or crafts or ping pong, in the middle of your living room. All right, simplicity. You can try simplifying your closet. Maybe just get 30 hangers, and then whatever clothes fit on those 30 hangers, keep those and get rid of the rest. Radical, I know, but it's actually really fun. You could organize your desk space or your workspace so that it doesn't feel cluttered, that each thing has a proper place. Meal prep, that's a great way to simplify. Okay, slowing, some ideas for you. Eat at your table instead of in your bed or on the couch. And just enjoy your food without a podcast or a TV show going. Just sit and eat your food. It's good. You can have a candle on your table or your nightstand. Take the time to light it and enjoy it. Put activities that force you to slow down, like reading or puzzling or crocheting, out in a visible, accessible spot for you. Okay, ideas for silence and solitude. You could break your radio, put tape over the auxiliary jack, remove your Bluetooth adapter. Whatever newfangled device allows you to listen to music in your car, get rid of it so you can drive in silence. You could try keeping your headphones in your backpack or just forget them at home altogether. Get a hammock and hammock around campus. It's a great way to be silent and with God. These are all great practices that can slowly form our character and shape us into who God has created us to be. And we can use our houses and our workspaces, our rooms, to help form who we are becoming positively. But I want to tell you guys, only choose one thing. I just named a whole bunch of ideas. Do not do them all, because then you will not do any of it. I promise. These are just ideas. The sky's the limit. Whatever floats your boat, do that. You can always ask other people what works for them. Try out stuff. Doesn't work? Change it. But just choose one idea, one thing that you want to work on, and try shaping your space to encourage that. But most importantly, when Joshua talks about, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, I want you to consider how your space invites you to be with God. Because those are the sorts of design decisions and shape spacing that God cares the most about. Eden was about an intentional space to be with God. The tabernacle was about a special place to be with God. God cares most about being in relationship with us. So whether you put away other gods or shape your environment to support hospitality and slowing, I most want you to put intentionality and thought into how your space invites you into being with God. In my space, I do a couple of things to help promote this. First, I have my Bible and whatever positive God-oriented books that I'm reading right on my bedside table to nudge me to engage with God last thing at night and first thing in the morning. I keep a verse that God is speaking to me through visible in my kitchen. It's a small nudge to recenter me in Him whenever I see it throughout the day. And I also have 2 dedicated holy spaces in my house. They're just like intentional places where I like to hang out with God. My back porch is amazing. I love it. And I have a rocking chair there where I sit and I be with God. Now, when the mosquitoes are savage or it is blisteringly hot outside, I use my second holy space and I sit inside in front of my window in my bedroom. Now, I could put something seemingly more functional in that space, but I have intentionally left it blank so that it is a protected, intentional spot for me to slow down and be with God. How can you shape your space to invite you to be with God? In the same way that God shaped Eden and the tabernacle and our whole world to invite you to be with Him. Maybe a special candle with a unique scent, or having a prayer rug or a prayer hammock. I know dorm rooms are very small, but don't feel limited by your space. Jesus didn't have a house, not even a dorm room, and He still chose intentional spaces to be with God. Spaces that were quiet and undisturbed and that nudged Him to connect with His Father. And feel free to get creative here. If art connects you to God, sharpen your colored pencils. Put them on your table with paper so it's easy to just sit down and color a prayer. If nature connects you to God, set up some special plants in the corner of your room or by your prayer chair. Take off your shoes when you enter your house to remind yourself that you are on holy ground and that God is with you. Whatever nudges you to be with Jesus, do that. Now, we have flowers available here at ENR2 for you to take if you like. And I invite you to take one and to put it in your house to remind you of the Garden of Eden and God's intention to be with you. Because why did God spend 243 verses in the Bible detailing the tabernacle? Because He wants to be with you. That's how important it is to Him. The tabernacle was a space where people could be with God, and that matters so immensely that God lovingly and intentionally shaped a space that invited us to draw close to Him. All of the other nudges and good practices that we can set up in our environments that shape us into people of character and Christ-likeness are excellent and awesome. But all of it is for naught if we aren't in relationship with God. So shape your space to respond to God's invitation to you, His initiation and His deep love, a space that lets your soul come home and rest in Him. Let's pray. God, thank you for being the initiator. Thank you for being the space shaper, the one who designs places to draw us close to you. Please help us to look at our homes and our spaces critically and recognizing what are the nudges that are in place that either invite me to draw closer to you or that lead me to behaviors that I don't want, God. Help us to make intentional choices in our spaces so that we can fall more deeply in love with you. Amen.
Thank you for joining the Damascus Road podcast. Our mission is to follow Jesus together by being with God, loving everyone, transforming people, developing leaders, growing new ministries, and changing the world. You can find out more about us online at DamascusRoadTucson.com.